So real-world game audio. What does that mean? Well, it means you can go to YouTube and you can find all kinds of things about, okay, here's how we use audio kinetics wise. I'm sorry, I don't want to assume people know things. How many people know what audio kinetics wise is? Well, we have a few people, all right? So I get to work with tools and technology. I've been involved, just to sort of give a background into who I am and what I do. I started writing music for games back in 1994. Before that, actually, the Ad-Lib sound card came out in 1987, and I started writing music on that. Then the game that you're seeing right here was being programmed, and a lot of temp art was being created by my buddy Jason Emery, who then went to PopCap and is now working at Global Outlier on a really cool game. But he was programming a parallax engine and a bunch of awesome creative stuff into this shooter called Tyrion, which at one point was the most downloaded GOG game because it was free and it was fun. But this was first published by Epic, back then Mega Games, in 1995. So I took his demo to Apogee with Scott Miller, and not to belabor the story, but essentially, what I'm going to be talking about is details that don't have as much to do with technology and stuff that you can normally find on YouTube. The idea is that this is part of why I'm here this year. You know, I've done a bunch of stuff at MAGFest over the years, like One Man Star Wars, and that's a lot of fun. But when it comes to imparting knowledge, it's really more about something you can find here that doesn't exist in other places. And something that I'm fine with talking about here, with some caveats, is experiences with game companies that can serve to help others with maybe their goals, or just to serve as interesting stories. Either way. So yeah, in '94 and in '94 we took this to Epic, and I sort of packaged up the stuff that Jason was doing, and we put it in this. We created a pitch for Epic at the time, and these were in the days when internet wasn't, there was CompuServe and Prodigy and BBSs, old school, right? And so you couldn't just, email somebody or hook up with somebody on Discord or say, hey, I'd like to participate in your project, because that's what a lot of people are doing these days. And since there's so many more interested people, it doesn't necessarily get any easier to be able to find a niche or work on a project, right? There can be rejection, there can be issues that people feel where it affects their emotions. And so what I'm doing here this year encompasses a lot more, and if you get a huge blast of audio, I apologize. Tell me if you need to mute this. It's more about relationships, how we deal with each other socially, how we work together, right? I know that AI is a big subject, and I am going to get to that towards the end. So we'll have maybe 45 minutes, but at least a half an hour of Q&A as I get to the end of this. And there's an AMA that's a bit more of a relaxed fun tomorrow where, seriously, I'll preface it before I begin, but it is an AMA. So, have I checked the settings on my device? The volume is active on here, and I'm happy to go to the audio here. When I plugged it in, it says, yeah, I'll do it again. Hold on. Out and in. And then it will ask, and I put it on speakers, which is where it's supposed to be, right? Which device did you plug in? Or should it be headphones? No, speakers, right? Yes. Okay, so I say optimize. And then it should.
Does the video have audio?
The video does have audio. Can I see this one? Yeah, go for it. Drive. Feel free to drive. Yes. No worries. Hardworking MAGFest staff. Can we give them a round of applause, please? People like this don't sleep for 4 days. They work their butts off, so thank you so much. This is stuff that I do myself, and it's funny, audio people that get stumped at conferences about their own devices, right? It's something that happens all the time. In GDCs, we do presentations that involve really crazy game engines and a lot of middleware, and yet, success! Thank you! We have liftoff. All right. So I'm Yeah, this is, we'll get some music here and then I'll... Oh my gosh, yeah, this was so old. So this is essentially an ad lib score that was written on an ad lib, that's the tech part of it, right? The more interesting aspect of this was that the demos that we sent off were cold, and meaning that we did not know anybody at Epic or Apogee. We found out names, right? I'm pretty sure Tim Sweeney's name was known at that point. Scott Miller at Apogee was the head of Apogee. So we sent these demos off to both of them, and Origin Systems, because we loved Ultima, and we loved Wing Commander and the old school games there. So, well, back then they were new. But we were like, we didn't get a response from Origin at all. Epic and Apogee sent us exactly the same response packet in terms of its format. I thought there was like they would send off to some company that says like, hey, if you're a shareware company, here's your developer response packet. The same glossy folder with the same size logo on it, white glossy folder, with a bunch of material inside saying, we're Apogee, we're Epic Games, and we're like the best up-and-coming company, and you want to work with us, right? Some of the nitty-gritty. The Apogee deal was that they already had a shooter in progress called Star Gunner, which, with music by Bobby Prince, if anybody's familiar with that, he's the creator of the original music for Doom. Not Mick Gordon, even though Mick Gordon is incredibly talented, but this is old school Bobby Prince. He's a lawyer, and I got to room with him at a conference at one point, and man, he's full of funny stories as well. He had one of the first GPS, talking GPSs. He had a laptop in a car that was a rental car, and instead of, because it was early GPS and early speech recognition or whatever it was, if it said drive, it would say doctor. And if it said northeast in terms of a road you needed to go to, it would say knee. And so each time one of those things would happen, Bobby would burst into peals of laughter. So Bobby's a fun guy. Anyway, so he was doing Star Gunner. Scott Miller got back to us and said, sorry, your idea is cool. But Epic, this game got recognized by good old Cliff Bleszinski. If anybody recognizes that name, he's worked on Gears of War. He was the lead designer on Unreal and Unreal Tournament. And then he did a game called Lawbreakers, which busted him up pretty good, unfortunately. It wasn't nearly as successful. And he was just like, nah, I don't think I'm into games right now. But still, great guy. He essentially pitched, or he was at Epic doing Jazz Jackrabbit. This was before Unreal, and he said, this shooter game looks really cool. It's like Xanac for the NES, and you should publish it for them. And they were going to publish it under an arm of Epic called Safari Software. And then it eventually became a full-fledged Epic game because the producer we got assigned, Robert Allen, found us some amazing artists. Daniel Cook, who's head of Spry Fox. Is anybody familiar with Spry Fox? I highly recommend you look up Lost Garden. And if you're writing stuff down, I appreciate it. I should have resources that should be available. But if not, feel free to bug me and say, yeah, you mentioned Lost Garden, and then you didn't post the link. So Lost Garden is incredibly clever game design. He also looks at social aspects of gaming. He says, what is it that's going to be beyond the standard loop of somebody's, one of your characters dies, or, you're in a jumping puzzle, or you do another standard puzzle. So many things that just get repeated in the games that we play, right? Even in, I see Spider-Man 2. Anybody play Spider-Man 2? I mean, Spider-Man 2 is pretty good. But it still has very standard core loops. It looks amazing. It has some cool ideas. It really engages you with the Marvel Universe and the characters. It's got some good stories. It's got some really clever use of voice acting, where if you are actively swinging, Peter or Miles Morales will have sort of more in their voice, but if they're just walking around, they'll talk like this. The exact same set of lines will be recorded 3 times. If they're sneaking, they'll be whispering. And if they're, so if you've noticed that, it's a really, really cool audio effect that people don't necessarily notice, but just immerses you that much more. But the game mechanic loops still are very similar, right? So Daniel Cook, the artist that drew this incredible stuff, came up with Lost Garden as a way of talking about game design. I don't know how recent it all is, but then there's Spry Fox, and Spry Fox got, I believe, purchased by none other than, recently, Epic Games. So he went back home, so to speak. So, the interesting aspect of getting the game pitched was that, we could have gotten more rejection. We could have gotten rejected by Epic. We could have gotten rejected by every publisher. And then would we have had games? Would I be in the industry still? I don't know. Jason's talent with programming combined with the art of Dan Cook really yielded the success that Tyrion was. It sold pretty well. It got good reviews in Next Generation and PC Gamer magazine. And people seemed to like it. And again, another thing that contributed was that the license was given back to Jason after it had sold for, 5 or 6 years by Epic. And Epic decided to either transfer the rights back to the developers or just let the game IPs just go. I know there's some issues with Unreal Tournament getting removed from Steam. If anybody's familiar with that, that's a little bit confusing. But Epic doesn't necessarily, the main thing that Epic is doing now, this is kind of why we're here. This is why we're talking about this. Tim Sweeney's goal is something similar to Metaverse with David Zucker. Like, that is his end game. And it's not the Metaverse that you saw crash and burn that David Zucker attempted. It's something that he's really trying to create in a deliberate way that is a slow release cycle for people to gradually step into, so that it's not just you buy a product, or in the form of a game, you play the game, you finish the game, we repeat the process, right? Like game loops. He's like, let's get out of that loop. Let's get into a space where it's where people can feel virtually connected and their experiences aren't necessarily in these single projects. Like maybe we have a running, like maybe not an MMO, but a running game that continually changes in some way. I don't know. He's got pretty out there ideas in terms of advanced stuff that he's really, really going for. So things like Unreal Tournament in their original form may not matter as much anymore. That's just conjecture. I cannot for sure say what Tim or whoever it is that's making those decisions are doing. But the idea is, like I said, is that if it wasn't for Cliff, this wouldn't have happened. And then that led to Unreal. Unreal was interesting because, and this is, I'll share this in a personal way, I was still used to music that was per level. You'd write music that was maybe 2 minutes, 3 minutes long, and it would be themed to whatever the level was, and then you'd just move on. Tim and James Schmaltz said, hey, why don't we have interactive music? And I was like, nah, I don't. And it was kind of like an I don't feel like doing interactive music response. It wasn't like a genuine interest because it just wasn't part of my brain space. I just didn't even think that way. I was so used to games being the way they were that I didn't think about what they could be, and they were kind of pushing me in that direction. So now that we're a little past Tyrion, let's check out Unreal. Let's do like an Unreal long play. Not necessarily specific stuff with the transitions, because again, that's more. Yes, no commentary. How many? Let's give a hand to no commentary recorders. Oh my goodness. Not that there aren't cool stuff. So we're on from AdLib to mod files, and the reason that Unreal happened is initiative. Admittedly, it was initiative on my part. I'm backtracking a little bit. In that we saw this being developed because we were at the Epic offices already. Tyrion was getting published. I was doing stuff for Jazz, and we saw this cool 3D engine being made by Tim and James Schmaltz. I mean, back then this was the shit, and it still doesn't look too bad, to be honest. And so we saw this, and Michiel Vandenbos was in the studio, who has worked on Age of Wonders and a lot of other games by Triumph Studios. They recently did the latest Age of Wonders 4, I think it was. So let's quiet this down a little bit. Yeah, there's bits of cinematic stuff that Cliff wanted in here, along with not necessarily starting with music right away, with stopping the music when the scar attacks you for the first time, that sort of thing. So I liked that, right? That was the creative angle where you have somebody that's a creative lead on a product saying, I'm sounding like Steve Jobs, on a game, on a creative lead on a game, coming at you with like, hey, I've got this vision, and I'd like it to sound like this and look like this, right? When they're passionate and it doesn't sound like they're just, making you do something that you might not be interested in, it gets so much easier just to do stuff with that kind of leadership. And Cliff did that, like in a number of cases, but it wasn't that much in Unreal. In Unreal, and as a matter of fact, Unreal Tournament, most of the time, the format of the interactive music that I mentioned earlier is exploration, combat, suspense. And this advanced in Deus Ex a little bit. But again, not my idea. This was Tim, and originally some of the exploration we did was location-based interactive music, where you would cross a certain boundary and it would shift depending on the location that you were. And Tim's first question was, yeah, Alex, what if like they go back and forth across the line with the radius, like they can just make the music change constantly? That's going to suck. And he was right about that. So location-specific music was not something that we ended up doing. We ended up doing state-based. So the action or the combat and the exploration and the suspense were what we ended up with. But again, that stuff wasn't pushed on me, but we eventually did it. It ended up being really effective because it helped in the scenes because the designers could trigger these whenever they felt like it. They would trigger those so that you could go across a location-specific trigger in a map, and it would make these changes take place. Or you would, if an enemy noticed you, they had that being tracked in whatever their AI was, and that would trigger a combat piece, right? But these things wouldn't go immediately back if you shifted your location, so it didn't sound like a DJ, going back and forth between records. And that's how we sort of figured things out for Unreal. And it was mods instead of FM sound, which I think enabled us to get a really rich experience out of that. Another great thing creatively with Unreal was we got freedom. We could do whatever we felt like doing. These days, it's a bit different. A lot of people, especially at big publishers, will analyze and have lots of ears and directors and multiple levels of departments going through what they think the music should be, how it should sound, how it should behave. And it can be a nightmare for a composer in particular because there could be tons of iteration that may not be necessary, music getting thrown out, things being really overanalyzed, right? Now, it doesn't always work when you just say, hey, write to what you're looking at, because that's what happened with Unreal. We were inspired by Rodney Matthews' concept art books and Roger Dean, because that was sort of what informed the big wide open spaces in Unreal. These books were sitting in Tim Sweeney's office. And then Cliff Bleszinski quickly discovered that you couldn't have one of these mile-long bridges over vast chasms that were in this artwork of Roger Dean and Rodney Matthews, because if you have a player spending like 5 minutes walking across a one-player-wide bridge that they can instantly, easily fall to their deaths from, that doesn't make the best game design and game mechanics, right? So spaces had to be compressed. Obviously, memory was still a consideration, pushing the envelope with 3D. They had to combine wide spaces with less polys and more realistic ways of the player getting around than a fantasy piece of art by these brilliant artists. But that inspired the music big time. So we took samples that were a combination of orchestral and electronic, and we just put them all together in a stew that, oh, here we go. So, yeah, this music worked really well. It's called Dusk Horizon. It was picked by Pancho Eccles. Eccles? I don't know if I'm saying that right. He was the LD for this, level designer. And I wrote this theme without this level in mind. But he put it in, and stars aligned so that it really, really worked when you step off the ship and you've got a sort of a subtle synth line with these really sweepy pads combined with really high synthy slow note leads. And this is going to sound egotistical. The sort of stuff we did here, I don't hear very much in games. Like, there's lots of orchestral, there's lots of electronic. Sometimes there's like experimentations where like look at an Austin Wintory game, right? Austin's main influence is acoustic instrumentation. Like, he doesn't really use synths at all. There was a bit of synths in Journey, sorry. Like, there was some transitions, and you can go and look at his speeches on Journey, and really, really great composer and did some amazing work. But that's his limiting factor. And here, with mod files, we only have so much memory, and we choose a certain amount of things, but because of the nature of the samples, we can pick essentially whatever we want. And we didn't have all those levels of administration telling us what to do. So sometimes that works really well. It doesn't necessarily always work that well. Be open to iteration, meaning just being able to scrap a piece of music, start over, try again, see what else can work. Maybe use a banjo. So you never know what's necessarily going to work. And in this case, since we were working more to concept art, that meant that it inspired us more than 3D imagery in the game itself. So that's sort of the creative angle. The business angle, or at least like how we got money from Unreal, was royalties. Everybody on the team was offered a certain royalty. So it started with Epic standard deal. This is ages ago. 30% would go to developers, which admittedly, I still maintain that I completely agree that that's a lot. Like, if you were to go to a book publisher, like, you might see 7% or some tiny amount from publishing a book. I don't know what publishers offer, game developers these days, because I haven't done anything grassroots and pitched it to a publisher in a long time. But 30% was good, right? And then on top of that, you would split that 30% into what each developer contributed. The first amount that I was getting was 3% of that 30%. And that doesn't sound like a lot, but more people started joining the team. And eventually, it was James Schmaltz, I think it was just James, not Tim, because James was one of the leads. He called me up and said, "Hey, do you mind if that goes down to 2?" And I was like, "Why would it go down to 2?" He's like, "Well, the biggest, the one that's contributing the most to the game in terms of a lot of stuff is Cliff, and he's pretty much the highest percentage guy on the team, and he's getting 7. So there's more people coming on. We kind of need this to." And so I responded with, "Well, what about a salary?" And he's like, "Oh, I'll pay you a salary, no problem. What do you want?" And I sort of hesitated. I got a little bit like, wait a minute, if you're instantly going to jump on this, that must mean that even the 2% that you're talking about is going to be more than that. So I stuck with it. It ended up being about 2 years' worth of living expenses, right? I was able to pay for, and that's pretty good, right? Because I think I worked on the game overall for maybe 6 months. So it ended up being a net plus. But I certainly didn't retire off of the music for Unreal, right? The other stuff took place, like not knowing how to pay quarterly taxes, discovering that issue. How many people here are independent contractors? Okay. So people probably are familiar with the lessons of paying quarterly taxes and making sure that you do all your due diligence so you really don't get killed on taxes, right? So seriously, that happened to me. I ended up owing a lot. And it was after Unreal came out, but I was just like, great, I got all this money. Now I can just do whatever the hell I want with it. So yeah, and I had parents that I think might have mentioned it, but I might not have listened. And so, of course, these days, like when I talk to my boys, I've got a 15-year-old that wants to get into voiceover, and I am grilling him on what happens all the way through the chain in terms of the gotchas and the lessons and the things that you need to be familiar with. Anyway, so the 2%. That reminds me of a story of in Star Wars: A New Hope. Good old Alec Guinness, who played Obi-Wan Kenobi, was being interviewed by Terry Wogan or something like that, and he was talking about the deal that he had. And he said, "Well, I talked to George Lucas, and I said, I read the script that you gave me, and I believe that it's very good. I was wondering if we could change a bit of the dialogue, and because some of it seems a bit ropey." And so he allowed me to do this, and he was a very energetic young man. He was very polite, and we got along just fine. And so the deal that they offered me was 2.5% of the gross, or something like that. And so Lucas. Oh no, it was 2%. And so Lucas called me up and said, like, I think this is how Guinness is impersonating Lucas. I think that the dialogue bits you have helped us very well. Perhaps maybe you'd like a 0.5%, another 0.5%. And I said, it was very generous of you. And so when it looked as though the movie was going to be a smash and do tremendously well, I called up the producer and said, I had to talk with George, and he told me about the additional amount that you were talking about. So I was wondering, my agent was telling me if we could have something in writing. And then immediately the producer said, "Oh, about the 0.25% you mean?" Because it was already going to be a hit. So he's just like, so no, he got stuck. So it was 2.25%. And so, like, the guy that was interviewing him said, like, "Yeah, you got like a huge amount of money, like millions and millions." He's like, no, not quite, no. So yes, that was an interesting adventure in terms of companies and earnings. These days, I am not aware of any companies that would do anything in terms of royalties. Yes, I'm seeing some shaking heads. Like, no. Oh, are you kidding? It's tough. It's not an easy thing to be able to have these negotiating things. Anyway, so we're into, when we get into Unreal Tournament. Unreal Young? No, right. We got Unreal Tournament fans? Cool, very cool. Yeah, heck, I'll just play the music. Oh no, I'll do the long play. I like playing. I mean, it's a bit selfish to just play the music. I mean, it doesn't work nearly as well as no commentary. Yes. So let's just skip ahead a little. Maybe. So I don't recognize this level. This looks like an original Unreal 1 level. So what ended up happening with Unreal 1 was that they had a game that was too big to release in terms of the amount of content that they had. So they took almost half of what happened in Unreal and put that into the Unreal Level Pack. Return to Na Pali, it was called, and they let Legend Entertainment actually complete the level pack for it. I got to work with, was it David Yackley? There's a number of cool people, one of whom recently wrote a fantasy novel series. Glenn Dahlgren, that's his name. Yeah, so these people that ran Legend Entertainment were very nice, and we did the level pack. There's too much content. Unreal Tournament was on the horizon, and it started life as Unreal Bot Pack because they had hired a guy named Stephen Polge who had created Quake bots. And it's essentially AI players that you can play with of varying difficulties. And so what they decided to do was take the bot pack and turn it into a full-fledged game, and that was Unreal Tournament. And it ended up kicking Quake 3's ass! That was a big deal, seriously. All the respect to Carmack and id and all the amazing things that they've done. But the big question was, can we beat Quake 3? And I don't know specifically if sales meant that we beat Quake 3, But when I talk to people that are hardcore deathmatch players from that era, it's UT. That's the game that they prefer. And that makes me feel great. So thanks for that. Music, a lot simpler. Not interactive, just straight tunes. And I think I've mentioned this on a couple of other panels before, but one of the interesting stories that came out of that, that isn't just on YouTube, is that Cliff wanted the sound of propeller head from the movie The Matrix. If anybody's familiar with that, let me just pull it up. This is going to be fun. Hold on. Yeah, there we go. No, not propeller heads. Okay. Spy break. So let's listen to the. Let's do the scene. Listen a little bit. Trinity running up the wall and flipping. Anybody know, would this be considered drum and bass? Kind of. Big beat, thank you. Okay, so everybody's here is familiar with this, right? So Cliff went and said, hey, and said, make me a song that sounds like that, not 2004. Make me a song that sounds like that. And I gotta find it. Yeah, not that. Okay, the one that I made was this one. Go down. Kind of similar, right? Right. So, but the one that Michiel made, I'm going to find it. Oh, jeez. Which one is it? I swear, when you listen to this, you're going to... Enigma, Ending, Colossus, Canon, Bot. Wait, maybe it's Bot MCA 10. Wait, is this it? Yeah. Yeah. So, I think it was even closer to Spy Break than this. But, point being, when he submitted it, Cliff's first response was, we're going to get fucking sued. And yeah, so let's go back to Unreal Tournament long play. Yeah, so that was an interesting thing, but nobody ever called us out on that, mainly because in those days, the kind of publicity from a game like Unreal Tournament, even though it got great reviews, it sold really well, it wasn't nearly as mainstream as games are today with the kind of notoriety they have, right? There's more pop acts, there's more electronic groups, there's more people that have, pop status that are doing work in games than there used to be. Even though, like right around this time, there were, the game Wipeout XL had like Future Sound of London and Prodigy and all these really, really great electronic groups that were doing music for it. But that was less the norm. More the exception than the rule, right? These days, there's film composers that work in games, and I interviewed one of the first big film composers to work in a game, Harry Gregson Williams, who worked on Metal Gear Solid 2: Sons of Liberty. Great game. Metal Gear Solid fans? Yeah. That thing about the lady dancing in the rain kind of threw me, though. Because it was the first thing I saw of, I think, was it 5? But like, yeah, and I was just like, what am I looking at? But yeah, I mean, like even the original Metal Gear Solid had some very bizarre story, like in terms of cinematic presentation. So, they go nuts with some of those projects. So what Harry Gregson Williams said was, I do music for films. I think the last game I played was Pong back in 1974. I mean, it's no offense to people that are doing games. I mean, games are great, but I do music for films. You see, and now I tell my colleagues this that do games, and they're just like, "Yo, that bastard, he has no respect." And I'm like, I don't think he was being deliberately pretentious or egotistical about it. I think he's just like, don't think that I'm part of your fold and that I'm really one of you, because games are really not things that I engage in myself. So don't give me false credit for coming up with all these ideas. I just did what I was told and wrote the music, and they put it in, right? I don't even know how much he actually played the game. And there's a lot of people in other industries that don't necessarily. Well, I'll give you an example. Ellen Stern is Richard Epcar's wife, and they both do a lot of really cool projects. Richard Epcar is the voice of Batu in Ghost in the Shell standalone complex. He goes to a bunch of cons, really cool guy. But Ellen Stern would do like casting and directing, and I worked with her a little bit. And one of the things that she said was, well, I don't really do games that much. I mostly do movies in terms of work. And I had an answer ready. My answer was, well, that's okay. I don't really watch movies. And so she's like, oh, shut up. And I'm just like, well, how do you think it feels when we're supposed to be engaging on a project and you're saying, well, I don't really do this, right? Like, I mean, are you going to be somebody that builds commercial buildings and then have somebody hire you to build a house? And you go, no, I really build, KFCs. I don't really do these, home installations. No, that's not really my thing. But still, like, you've got somebody, but you're so talented at the KFC, you got to build my house, right? So there's a little bit of bizarreness in that logic that really does apply to hiring a film composer to score a game. So, a little bit of a rant there. Yes, there's some weirdness about it. There's also film composers and TV composers that love games, that get into it, that really, really care. Bear McCreary is one of them. I've forgotten his name now. Oh, it's terrible. And, well, there was a guy that we were going to work with that did some music on Pirates of the Caribbean 3, and he was very eager to learn about all the systems of the game, how the game worked, what the cues would be like, playing it, getting regular builds and all of that. And that is what audio directors like to hear. Is people that actually are just like, okay, I'm fascinated by this. Are we doing anything different? Is this something that has to be part of the IP where we keep things the same? And how's everything going to work? Just tell me everything, rather than, okay, just I'll write some music for you. All right, so on from Unreal Tournament, which became the hit that it was. The economics, the finances of that. It was $2,000 a song. Which, we just feel like, wow, that's pretty good. It is pretty good, actually. Particularly, we don't even have to separate indie, but I will just drop that there is an unofficial posted standard for composers in terms of their rates for a AAA game of around $1,500 per approved minute. Okay, and that's just for the writing of the music. That's going into a DAW, writing with VSTs and using Spitfire or what have you. Again, a million videos out there on how you can write stuff in a DAW and make stuff sound a certain way and use automation and all that sort of thing. But there's not a whole lot about people saying, how much I charge. So $1,500 for AAA. As you go away from AAA, there's people that push a little bit more on the $1,200 side. This also has to do with experience level. Yes, I've been working 25 years in games. It doesn't mean that I can charge what Bear McCreary would charge for a game. So my rates do start at the $1,500 per minute for if somebody had even AA project. And AA, I can't think of a really, really good example for what AA would be. Actually, yes, I can. Wasteland 3, which was a game that I did work on. I did some music for, did audio direction and sound design. In fact, we can... what would have been after Unreal Tournament? Oh, no, I got to talk about Midway first. I'm sorry. I'll get to Wasteland in a minute, but that's AA. I would probably go start with $1,500. They'd beat me down to $1,200, okay? When Tommy Tallarico, yes, I'm saying that name, How many people here have seen the Roblox oof video? Okay. I know that guy personally, all right? I've known him for a long time. A lot of what is said in that video is stuff that I was privy to in certain ways, okay? And so, but let me just say this. We all have friends that were like, oh, yeah, that seems like a really great idea based on a decision that they did. And then some friends that were like, I don't know if I agree with that, but you do you, and, you know, you got your whole thing going, right? So George Sanger, the Fat Man. How many people have heard of George Sanger? Okay, yes, Brandon's heard of him. So George Sanger wrote, or his team, Team Fat, wrote the music for Wing Commander and Seventh Guest and 11th Hour, you know, like pretty cool retro titles. And George Sanger is one of the most, you know, memorable personalities in the entire game industry, not just game audio. And George and Tommy were both, you know, pretty powerful game audio people in their day, you know, working on these projects that were, you know, fairly well known. They were friends at first, then they became arch rivals, you know, bitter enemies. There was a lot of envy from George about the kind of money that Tommy would get for certain projects. 2 Rolexes and a gold jacket with sunglasses. And yes, strippers walking next to him at conventions. This is the sort of thing that actually happened back in the day. But at the same time, Tommy was trying to get composers paid exactly the same amount. And he was getting paid, or he got a project where I think it was $2,000 a minute. And he said, I want to start an organization where everybody gets the same. I certainly couldn't fault him for that. I thought that was a cool idea. It's not that realistic, is it, right? Different projects have different requirements. Some projects are college kids paying with a credit card, and they can't afford $2,000 a minute. Some of them are, you know, even single A projects that have, you know, maybe they're Kickstarter projects, and, you know, they can afford $2,000 a minute for 5 minutes, right? So it's, again, heart's in the right place, right? So after all of that talk, you know, I was talking about the rates specifically in regard to Tommy, but here's where I wanted to end with the Roblox video, is that George, with all of the rivalry that they had, there was some issues, right? When that video came out, George visited Tommy, and he sent me a picture on my phone with his arm around Tommy saying, he's had a really bad year, everybody needs a hug. So, or he said the dude needed a hug. So I was impressed. I was like, wow. So, I mean, essentially what he meant was the humbleness, I think, had been achieved in Tommy's case. I don't know that personally. I haven't talked to him in a long time. So that's interesting stuff that I don't get too far into, but I get a little bit into because that's personal relationships. It's important to recognize, you know, like, and I can't offer opinions that are hearsay in any way. We just had a consent panel, so I can't speak on anybody's behalf in terms of what their actual intent is for anything or all of that stuff, right? But I can say what the impact on me was in terms of my own experiences and my interpretation. I'm not going to say that that's the absolute as to how all of this stuff goes down. But yes, Tommy started the Game Audio Network Guild because he wanted to form a union. That's a fact. You can probably look it up someplace. Van Webster said, start a union and you're going to have a hell of a time. It's not going to be that easy. Unions have lots of issues. SAG-AFTRA, people are potentially familiar with all of the debacle with that. They say, no more AI. And then they join hands with an AI company. And you're like, what the fuck? What were you smoking? Hey, I'm a SAG-AFTRA actor. I don't have the information. Bonnie Bogovich does. I need to talk to her first. I'm sorry. There's probably stuff I don't know. There's definitely stuff I don't know. All right, so Ron from Unreal. I was going to go to Wasteland 3, I think. But, no, Midway first. That's right. Midway. Midway is a perfect example of what ties into the consent panel. But hold on a second. Let's think of a game that I worked on. Oh, yeah, Gauntlet 7 Sorrows. I can't spell. Gauntlet 7 Sorrows. How many people here have heard of Gauntlet 7 Sorrows? Awesome. I'm glad somebody has. All right, so we'll do the full game walkthrough. Yeah, we probably can It's not Gauntlet 7 Sorrows. Let's fast forward a little bit.
Of the six who have spread chaos and destruction to the four corners of the world.
That's
Here
my voice.
Fight for nothing, driven mad by the evil power.
We had huge plans for Gauntlet 7 Sorrows that involved very, very out there compared to previous Gauntlet games storyline. The wizard was going to be from a tribe of cannibals. I'm like, what? Anybody here heard of Josh Sawyer at Obsidian Entertainment? He's one of their lead designers. Okay, so he has very interesting and sometimes very, very different ideas for storylines. He did Penitent, if anybody's heard of that game. Yes. Brilliant music. Amazing soundtrack. So the things that he was talking about didn't go over that well. Eventually he left and went to Obsidian. And Gauntlet got taken over by Scott Lane, who made it essentially more of a simple Gauntlet game. So we had... I don't even know if you can hear the music there. Anyway, this was live orchestra, first live orchestra project. And the reason that we went with live orchestra was because of a guy that you all might be familiar with, whose name is Inan Zur. He wrote the music for Starfield, wrote the music for at least one of the Fallout games. Fallout 4. Thank you. And he is the nicest guy, super, super nice, very passionate about the music. You can go listen to his GDC talks about how he created the scores, but I call him up and he says, Alex, you got to use a live orchestra. It's going to make your game sound amazing. It's rich and full, and it's got harmonics and everything. And so he arranges it all. We go up to Seattle, record to the Seattle Northwest Symphonia at Bastyr University Chapel, and it was great. It sounds really, really good. That was all I needed to do as far as like live orchestra was concerned. These days, people assume, yes, let's go to Abbey Road. And I'm like, wait, everybody goes to Abbey Road. Like all the AAA games. Like you see them standing outside of Abbey Road going, look at me, oh my God, I've made it, Mom. Really? Really? You and however many thousands of people, right? Orchestra is a tool, just like any VST instrument, just like anything you would find in Ableton, just like your average, I'm trying to think of a soft synth, Omnisphere, right? As synthesizers that you can get. There's so much that there's decision paralysis in terms of the tools that you can use. So this was live orchestra. The design went really sideways. It was really bizarre. The head of the studio said that he was going to spend like $7 million. It ended up being $12 million. They let him go. The things at Midway that I encountered were probably the worst from any company that I had worked at. Midway's not really around anymore. The good people at Neversoft weren't even in the studio that I was in. But not mentioning names, but the stories at Midway could fill a coffee book where people would just be a bit shocked at some of the stuff that was going on in terms of assumptions and how people behaved towards each other. Now, people were pretty professional. I'm talking about men behaving around women. I won't go into specific stories here, but there were just things that were not okay. This was in the late 90s, and a lot of the stories that I heard secondhand from people that had been here, which again, yes, I won't impart because I don't have consent from them to do so, but were far worse than things that I was hearing or that I was privy to while I was there. Things that were very bad. And that's part of why I got interested in, with Bonnie Bogovich, working on gender relations panels and the consent thing that we did here today. Important things. So, yes. But in terms of creativity, there was some cool stuff going on at Midway. It was fun to work on a Gauntlet game. I mean, Gauntlet's a really cool franchise. There was a new one, maybe 5 or 6 or 7 years ago, something like that. And the studio that I went into was built by the previous audio director, and I wish I could remember the guy's name, for hundreds of thousands of dollars. It had the slanted walls. It had a preamp that cost like $5,000 or $6,000. It had a Neumann U87 microphone. They had Godin MIDI guitars and MIDI guitar to MIDI interfaces. Ridiculous amounts of money was spent at the studio on all different things. And it used to be a place where they made arcade games. It's definitely not there anymore. It's off of Flanders in San Diego. And the floor was tile because they would roll arcade games down the hallways in order to test them. And that place used to be in El Cajon as Leland Enterprises, which is the company that made Dragon's Lair. Anybody hear of Dragon's Lair? Yeah. Sweet. So that was, I had to do a little pulse checking when I saw the pictures on the walls of Dragon's Lair and the Leland Enterprises stuff. I think even Iron Man Stewart's Off-Road was made at that studio, so it was pretty cool. A lot of good history. But yes, not so great in terms of company culture and just the way people behaved, standard HR stuff. But really good people that I got to meet, like Josh Sawyer was definitely one of them. He's at Obsidian now. And after Midway, I went to Obsidian. And Obsidian is interesting because it does have a better culture. Or at least it was when I was there. I'm sure it still does. I hope it still does. And the first game that I worked on was Alpha Protocol. Not massively known, but really, really... Okay, so here we go. That's old school. So the music that you're going to hear is mostly by Jason Hayes and Rod Abernethy that were with Red Note Audio. A couple of the pieces of music in here is still stuff that I worked on. Don't want to belabor this. How many people here played Alpha Protocol? How many people here have heard of Alpha Protocol? Okay, that's kind of cool. All right. So the initial concepts really were amazing. Let me tell you something that I don't know. It's probably out there somewhere, but it's still, what isn't out there is how I felt about how it went down. The first demo for Alpha Protocol that was introduced that I was able to partake in, that we had music written for, was the hero of the game in a fight in a plane where they had to jump out of the plane, grab one of the guys, guide yourself to one of the people that had the parachute. Kind of standard in terms of spy movie escape type sequences, right? But still, I hadn't seen this done quite this way in a game. And yes, it did have button mashing. So you jump out of the plane and you grab the, you fight the guy in the right way with the right button mash combinations. Then you take the parachute and then you land safely, and then there's something else that has to happen. The music that got written by Red Note for that was flawless. It was great. And it was because the button mashing, of course, depended on the timing of the sequences. Like when the player would get the button mash right, you had to do the transition so that the music was was seamless from one section to the other. So you might go a couple extra bars, or you might go like just past a certain bar. And that was fantastic in terms of, and that's right, Scott Lawler wasn't there. So I did the transitions. I actually did a good job on that. That's really cool. I'm sorry, if people are familiar with imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome people, myself included, yes. How many people here know what imposter syndrome is? Okay, for the people that do not know, it is constantly questioning yourself about your own capacity, your skill levels, your capabilities. It is being able to look at what other people do and compare what other people do and compare your own stuff to that. And so that, if you're always questioning yourself like that, and the stuff that you see other people do, you're saying, I don't know, am I good enough for that, or am I going to be able to compete with that or compare with that? That can be crippling, right? So there is a GDC speech with Stefan Schutz, and I believe even Bonnie, on imposter syndrome, and you can probably look it up in the GDC vault. It's probably free, I don't know, but just do a Google search on that, and it's a lot of good information. So, anyway, the imposter syndrome is like me saying, like, I can't believe I did that cool little bit. But yes, I was quite proud of how the transitions turned out and the music. Completely axed. And the reason it was completely axed was because the game in no other place had button mashing gameplay. No other mechanics that had that button mashing. And they were like, we've got to take care of it. And I made it very clear. I don't think it was Josh. I don't remember who the lead designer on that was. But I said, I'm really bummed because the music sounds so good. And it may even be on YouTube. I'm not going to hunt it down now. But anyway, we had Alpha Protocol. We had Aliens Crucible. If anybody's familiar or might remember, I think it was announced that Obsidian was working on an Aliens role-playing game. And because I'm a big fan of the original 2 movies, nothing against the rest, okay? But I was a big fan of the original 2, and role-playing game was going to be an extension of essentially those, kind of ignoring the third one, but not involving Ripley, but completely new characters. And I was so excited about that. We had a pretty good budget of about $1.2 million for the audio. Amazing, right? But you want to know why it's that high? It's because for an RPG, Josh Sawyer was the lead designer on that, and what he wanted was all of the characters to be voiced. Depending on what the player would pick, right? You could pick race, you could pick gender, you could pick a number of other things, and that added up to obviously multiples of possibilities for the player to have. And we wanted authentic voices, not, okay, you pick whoever it is, of this race, and they end up sounding not of that race, right? That he was like, let's not do that. Let's actually have somebody that sounds like what it is that you pick. And so what that meant was a lot of additional lines, which added up to a huge VO budget. And I was like, I'm down with this. I'm on board. This is cool. But alas, it was not to be. And that was one of the projects that was canceled. There are stories about that online. There's other things that aren't online that I don't think I can talk about, which really, really sucks because there were some really, really awesome projects that didn't quite see the light of day. I got to say, that's something that I think would be possibly the most benefit. That's the thing that I really can't get into is certain projects that are under NDA that just can't be discussed. So, was somebody going to ask a question? No, not yet? Okay, cool. All right, so we're going to move on from there to Heatwave Interactive, because after... Oh yeah, anything about culture, anything about finance? Well, I was salaried at Midway. Yeah, I was salaried at Midway, and at Ion Storm, the salary I was getting there was started at $40K as an audio director in 2000. I thought it was great. Before too long, especially with not paying taxes before, remember that story there? I realized I needed a little more. I worked pretty hard, tried to say, yes, I'm developing systems for, well, it was one project at the time, which was a sequel to Deus Ex. Oh, I didn't get into that, did I? Let's actually back up. Let's go to Deus Ex. I'm sure there's people that have played that, right? Okay. There are some stories about that I am happy to share without mentioning names and without removing value from any of the humans and the people that worked very hard and did what they did to the best of their ability. So Deus Ex had 2 design teams, A team and B team. The worst idea in the world. The design teams were at each other's, were always disagreeing about almost everything. Now, the game that ended up coming out of that, interesting, it's cut off. Is there any other way out of the cell bay? We've been cut off! What was that I didn't copy? I said, yeah, there we go. All stations have been alerted to your presence, sir. The main hangar seems to be the only way in or out. Anyway, so with Deus Ex, the A team and the B team really, really couldn't get along. And what ended up happening was, there was a lot of raised emotions. There was a lot of people that were like, this person did that, this person did this. I really don't agree with this. I really don't agree with that. We're not going to get a good game. The game ended up being really, really good. And as far as I could see, I'm not actually sure how the navigation was done, But the head of one of the teams was Harvey Smith. The head of the other was Bob White. Bob White ended up leaving Ion Storm after the end of Deus Ex. Harvey Smith ended up being lead designer, just the only lead designer, only one team on Deus Ex Invisible War, which was the sequel. Company culture. I can't stress communication even if it's uncomfortable. If there's something that makes you feel odd or like you're out of a loop or you're confused, ask. And if people on the team that you're on are like, no, you don't need to know that, don't worry about it, just, I'm seeing shit. Exactly, right? It seems obvious to say and agree to here, but how often does that happen? It happens a lot where people try to just push something aside just so that they don't have to deal with it.
Should be finalized within the week.
I was very new. This is my first audio director position in-house with that 40K thing, which eventually became 50.
Has he been infected?
And so, these guys.
Most certainly.
One of
When
these
I mentioned
characters
that we
is
put him
Tom
on the
Hall,
priority list
one of the
for
designers of
ambrosia
Doom.
vaccine,
So Ion Storm was composed of, at first, John Romero and Tom Hall, and then Warren Spector came on later. But yes, so the culture was, for me, I can say this because it's my perspective, right? So is that there were things that I wasn't aware of that I was curious about. Some things that I did that weren't that good were writing paragraphs and paragraphs of emails without any kind of questions or specifics or decision making because I was an audio director. And it was my first job, so I really wasn't communicating that well. So people would read these paragraphs and go, what am I supposed to be, how am I supposed to respond to this? And those were valid questions, absolutely appropriate to ask. It was difficult for me to be succinct in that way. So as a result of that, it was tough for me to be able to get points across. I could get simple things in terms of how the engine was to be developed for Invisible War. On Deus Ex, it was just being a composer, so they used the system for Unreal, and we had like conversation as well as suspense and combat and exploration, and then an intro and an outro in each level. And that's what comprised the bulk of this. So Deus Ex ended up sounding pretty good. It was very eclectic, just as Unreal had its own level of eclectic in terms of its style. But anyway, getting back to the culture, what ended up happening was the CFO came into the office that had me and a sound designer, Todd Simmons, and he sat down and he said, "Guys, I just got to tell you, you really got to start getting it done. You got to push it. You really got to start doing a better job." You know, the most generic things I could imagine as far as instructions. And so, of course, both of us are like, well, is there anything specific that you want us to address? Is there anything that's like a real issue here? I mean, not a real issue, but just something you can point to that says this wasn't handled well? No, can't tell you that. You really need to toe the line now. You're up against it now. We're like, has anybody had instructions like this from a supervisor or somebody that they've worked for, and you're like, what the fuck are you talking about? Yeah. So I had no issues with this guy when it came to being a CFO. It was great. We would sit down at Leeds meetings, and he would say, here's where we are financially, here's where we are going to be with the current budget, et cetera, et cetera. It was all very professionally done. But when it came to how we dealt with issues, everybody had their heads up their ass. I'm pointing at myself too. Like, I didn't know how to say, okay, I've got, I sent this email with the masses of paragraphs, and here's how I'm going to change it, right? There were producers that had multiple copies of Microsoft Project with individual dates on it, and I had to ask which copy I was supposed to look at. And I was like, why can't we just use one? And they were like, well, that's just the way it is. And I was like, okay. Another big issue is lack of, people's fear of confrontation. And that perception is like, when you talk about that, using those words, it sounds as automatically as though there's going to be anxiety involved, right? I don't like confrontation. So it's like, let's not look at it as a confrontation. Let's look at it as mutual problem solving. Let's look at it as working on something so that something comes out of it that makes a better game and helps us get along, because that's what I want. And everybody has different styles of communication and being able to get their point across and different levels of emotion. And all of those things go into how we are perceived and how how we present ourselves and how that gets perceived. So with this communication and how it's dealt with, nobody at the game companies from Epic to Midway, a bit more so at Obsidian, but at Ion Storm, people didn't talk about that. Like, we would have our reviews and we would say, okay, you've either hit these goals or you haven't. Or if there was a personal issue that somebody might have, it's like, you really need to toe the line. Oh yeah, and it was followed up because there was a new studio director. It wasn't Warren Spector. This was right under Warren in terms of being a manager of the studio, so to speak. And there was a review I went to, which the words were said, there's people that just don't like you. Okay, okay, you've stated something. How can I respond to this? She's like, and can I communicate with this person and resolve the issue? No, I can't tell you who it is. Not kidding. So, this is real stuff. And the reason I'm mentioning it is not to throw, hate grenades or anything along those lines. This is a learning experience for me. This is for me to go okay, clearly, this is, at that point it should have been okay, this is a red flag. Either I can deal with the situation or I can be at a different company, right? There's choices that have to be made in those circumstances. You either resolve something because at the end of the day, it's making good games. It's why we're all here. So, yeah, that's important stuff that is not on YouTube, and I do not plan to put on YouTube. All right. So I got about 20 minutes. Let's get into Wasteland. Wasteland 3 specifically. Now, this is mostly music by Mark Morgan. I was audio director on this. And no commentary, baby. There's some commentary. My boys love to watch Markiplier, if people are familiar with Markiplier. Yeah. And a while ago, there would be lots of screams. But these days, he's gotten a little more chill, and there's some funny stuff in there. For me. They always loved it. So I've actually grown to where I can tolerate Markiplier if one of my sons says, you need to listen to this.
Years for the Desert Rangers.
So this was cool. We got to go to Brian DiDomenico
ended,
mixed this in 5-1.
They tried to bring some order to what was left of Arizona.
And Brian DiDomenico was one of the sound designers. So let's talk about the good stuff. I had a team that I could work with on this, and it was after a Kickstarter. Actually, this was a FIG crowdfunded projects, but it also got support from Microsoft as a publisher by the time it came out. Wasteland 2 was just Kickstarter, and that earned $3-point-something million. This may have brought in around the same. Torment Tides of Numenera in between got $4-point-something million. I got to work on that one as well. But this is an interesting project because it got a publisher close to when it shipped. With additional resources and help. I'm pretty sure the cinematic was possible thanks to Microsoft. I'm not positive. But I was given resources, right? And one of those was I had the assumption where, I didn't know how to push. This happens at different studios. I've been told these days that I'm too nice. I've had somebody tell me recently, it's just the reason you didn't get the budget you needed for more resources was you're the nicest director we have. And I'm like, so I'm supposed to be an asshole? I'd rather not. I'd rather just present the facts and say, here's the deal. If we don't have this, we don't get this. But it turns out sometimes you got to just be okay, look, seriously, do you want good audio for your game? That's what I want. On Wasteland, I didn't really have that issue. But what I did have an issue with was thinking, because I was still in Kickstarter land in terms of funding, I'm okay, what we have is what we have to deal with. And that's it. So I had Brian DiDomenico, and that was about it, because he had worked on Bard's Tale 4 as the sound lead. And Brian's a great guy. He's fantastic to work with. He's super, super talented, and he is, I wouldn't say a perfectionist. He is more organized than I am. He is more detail-oriented than I am. And that is of extreme value to have, whether it's in an audio director position or a sound designer position, which is what he did on this. So there was a point in which I wasn't actually playing the game as an audio director. I wasn't mixing. I wasn't saying this doesn't have sound, that doesn't have sound. So good old Brian Fargo calls me on the phone and says, have you been playing the game? And I'm like, not really. I would be playing it to the point where if a sound needed to go in, I would play the portion of the game that had that sound in it, make sure it worked. But these were little bits and pieces. So that's being in the trenches and getting the work done, what typically sound designers do. And he said, well, why? And I was like, well, because we got all these things that need sound. And half of it's me and half of it's Brian. And he goes, well, do you need help? I was like, yes, that would be great. And he said, great. And so since he's the head of the whole company, he essentially said, we're going to hire another contract sound designer. And that was James Barker. Bells and Missiles is the name of his studio. And, think of this. I gave him instructions on the implementation for the game, how stuff worked, the people on the team that he could talk to ask questions, and that was it. He never asked me a question after that. Things just happened. That is the level of awesomeness of James Barker. Now, he's worked at like Insomniac, I think, and Naughty Dog, and pretty big companies when it comes to like implementation and sound design. So he knows his shit. But anyway, getting Jimmy on board, I'm sorry, that's his nickname, Jimmy, was fantastic and was great to work with. Super professional, super nice, just got it done. It was fantastic. So, but here's another issue on Wasteland 3. That again, that's a good part. Thank you, Brian Fargo, for that. I got another call from Brian Fargo. I can't hear the voices in the game. Take out the reverb. Like, is this a specific spot? Is this a place that where you need more cinematic, reaction or whatever? You really need the VO to stand out. I can mix it higher. He's like, no, take out the reverb. Yeah, but where are you talking? No, the whole game. So I talked to Tim Campbell, who is my current boss at Frost Giant, by the way. Check out Stormgate. For those of you who haven't, yes, I've got hands up in the back. Yes, there is something on the horizon that's coming in terms of a big milestone that we're just finishing up, I think, today. And we're on the way to, for different alphas and betas and that sort of thing. So there should be something on Steam that you can sign up for. And if you don't hear anything, is it Ben? Yes, I've already got Ben's card, and I'm going to help him get a copy of Stormgate. Anyway, so Tim Campbell was the creative director for Wasteland 3, and he is also creative director for Stormgate, lead designer, so to speak. And so I told Tim about Brian's call, and Tim says, just turn the reverb down a little bit. Don't take it out. I think because he agreed. He's like, taking reverb out. Like, if you're in a church, yes, it's top down, but if you're in these areas, you should still have that level of, immersion. So I did take it down a little bit, and no matter how low I took the reverb, Brian was to be like, no, take out the reverb, just get the reverb out of there. And I'm just like, man, this isn't going to win me any awards. Just kidding. I didn't care. But I did care about, the fact that these areas, these environments did not have the realism that was going to make them, make the player feel as though they were in a spooky space. Because there's plenty of spooky stuff in Wasteland 3. So that was sort of a weird situation. As far as culture goes as far as culture goes at In Exile Entertainment, this is the In Exile Entertainment of Wasteland 3. Maybe it's not, I'm pretty sure it's different now. Microsoft bought the studio, and they've got a building in Tustin, and they're making Clockwork something. I just got announced at MAGFest or whatever it was. So, back then, though, here was the thing. there was a part of company culture where if Brian Fargo just calls you and tells you to do something, you automatically do it, right? Now, when he told me to take that reverb out, and I finally did, I actually had the courage to say, Brian, I think that's a bad idea. And what was his response? Because of my experience at Ion Storm, I was still kind of in a huddle when it came to authority figures and people that were saying, you better toe the line, you got to do this. I'm just like, oh no, right? So it took a lot for me to say, I think that's a bad idea. And Brian helped instill my faith in decent supervisors by saying, I understand, I'm used to people disagreeing with me. He didn't say it rudely, he wasn't an a-hole about it, he was still insisting to make the change, but the response made me feel at least heard, minimally heard. Like I hear what you're saying. I'm still going to do it. This is a thing that, and I'm calm. And he was calm. And I value that a lot, rather than flying off the handle or getting super defensive. So disappointed in the reverb not going in, but still good experience as far as that goes. But the thing was, if Brian was going to call you and tell you to do something, you just had to do it no matter what. And this could be sweeping mechanics changes and huge stuff across the entirety of the game. So, 14 more minutes, sorry. And so that was the point where we had lots of talks across the leads as far as like, well, what if Brian makes a decision and it just really affects the game in a weird way, like, it's a better idea to consult with the people that are on the ground, whether they're the producers that understand the work that's gone in, the work that needs to be done, the budget, et cetera, and the people that actually do the work that say whether or not it can be done, whether it's the engineers or whether it's the designers, right? So he didn't really do that much in the way of consultation, but as a CEO, if you go digging in all of those areas, of course, you spend all your time doing that. So it's understandable that Brian would just make a decision as far as like, it's just a thing I want done. Figure out a way to do it. So there were people that were more practiced than I at saying, Brian, that's not just a bad idea, but we just can't do it, right? And here's the reason why. And so here's the lesson from all of this, that just, again, it's not across the board in terms of presentations. Be able to present something you think is important. As somebody that's in audio, this is one of the most challenging things there is, because it's so easy for the head of a studio or a lead designer to say, audio is not going to sell our game. Audio isn't going to be the thing that makes the players buy it or not buy it or whatever it is. Sometimes it is, right? How many people here would play Hades with no audio on? Not this guy. Oh, somebody raised their hand? Sorry. Well, I recommend playing Hades with audio on. Good old Darren Korb's music and the voice acting is pretty killer in that game. But point being, it takes a lot of practice, a lot of courage, a lot of careful thought in order to present a case that is very, very important. And you got to pick your battles, especially with the higher up you go. So if there's something to do with something very minuscule like, reverb in one room, that's not something that a CEO of a company is really going to have time for. They're going to expect, the people that are below to be able to make the calls like that. It's going to be something that's actually, is it going to sell more units? Is it going to be something that's completely groundbreaking? Like if you're going to make a presentation like, hey, we're going to have a concert in Fortnite, instead of just making it Fortnite. We're going to have a concert in there. And we're going to have, I think what I'm going to do for the rest, or for the last 11 minutes, is talk about the current state of the Unreal Engine, which there's lots of cool stuff in it. I'm going to, again, shout-outs in the good to start off with. Dan Reynolds is one of the people that worked on the current Unreal audio system along with Aaron McLaren. It is so hard not to go, Aaron McLaren! But he's the head of the audio team when it comes to engineering. And they're the people that make the engine. If you're going to download the Unreal Engine and learn it, these are the guys that worked on it, right? And there's more people than that. They had an audio producer I don't think is there anymore. Anyway, so where I was talking about Fortnite and groundbreaking things and things that you're going to present to somebody that are really going to turn things on their ear, sure. Taking something that, because remember what I said about Tim Sweeney in the metaverse, if you're going to take something that is like a concert by I don't know, whoever the latest and greatest pop star is, and you're gonna put it in Fortnite, then that's something that's different than just making, hiring some composer to do it, right? Or having people attend a concert. And supposedly some of the Fortnite concerts are the most attended concerts ever because they're virtual, right? Another aspect of the Unreal Engine that has been pushed a lot lately is procedural music. Anybody here familiar with Max MSP, Cycling 74? Sweet, very awesome. These are amazingly deep tools in their own right. And bless the hearts of Aaron McLaren and Dan Reynolds. Their goal is to make a Cycling 74 and a Max MSP inside Unreal. And a lot of the feature sets that's in there is essentially about procedurally generated music. Yeah, but what about creating sound design, like in a way that, is kind of easy to do? Oh, no, procedurally, look at the procedurally generated music. Yeah, but mixing, I kind of need to get the procedurally generated music is where it's at, bro. Seriously, check this out. This is awesome stuff. And I'm just like, but my game doesn't have procedurally generated music. Well, you should. You should do this. Look at what we're doing. There's lots of cool things about, how many people here are familiar with the current Unreal Engine system? Like the audio system, right? So it used to be something called sound cues. Before that, it was just putting WAV files in, or mod files, like, Unreal. And all the way up to Unreal 3, they had mod file support. Now, you had sound cues before, and now you have meta sounds. And meta sounds are even more expanded sound cues with more capability of programming and doing all this stuff. It's not something like you can just plug things in and instantly have them work, right? Not super easy and definitely not super intuitive, but very deep, like Max MSP and Cycling 74. Here's the example from the personal angle. I bring stuff up from my perspective with the particular project that I'm on, with the full understanding that the Unreal Engine is supposed to appeal to a wide variety of developers and publishers, for that matter. And I go to Dan and I go to Aaron. Dan always responds. He's almost instant with his responses. And that impresses the hell out of me. Like, not even Audio Kinetic responds instantly to people when it comes to, like, hey, I've got kind of this issue on my project, et cetera, et cetera. And so Dan always responds. At the same time, there is a bit of a response, from my perception, where you have, okay, I'm trying to do this. Well, you're not thinking right. How am I supposed to think about the problem? Like the mixing thing. It's just like, well, there's the procedural music, and it has been said that, like, well, there's a way that developers are trying to think about solving audio problems that we are trying to change, right? The problem is the message hasn't been gotten out that well. If people are familiar with Dan Worrell, how many people here have heard of the FabFilter plugins? Okay. So these are tools like equalizers and compressors and stuff that you apply to your tracks in your digital audio workstation in order to get your stuff sounding good. And Dan Worrell,
he's somebody that sort of sounds like this. He's a British guy, and he's got a highly compressed voice, and it sort of sounds like this when he talks. It's almost ASMR, but it's a little bizarre as well.
So go find Dan Worrell and look it up. But here's the thing about how he presents stuff. It's compelling. He scripts his stuff. He reads through it, and sometimes it's a little bit improvised. But for the most part, what he goes through is very, very specific. It's very to the point. It all makes sense, and it is structured in a way that you can follow. There are videos that Dan has done where he's presenting elements of the Unreal Engine. Not scripted. Essentially him going into the engine and figuring stuff out. Not figuring stuff out, but presenting things, but not so structured compared to Dan Worrell. If you put Dan Reynolds' video against Dan Worrell's video, there's a huge difference. It doesn't actually instruct in the way that makes you go into the tool, in this case Unreal, and go, okay, I get it. All of this, I'm not only invested and convinced because of the information that I've been presented, but it inspires me because this makes sense and it's probably going to solve some problems, or it's directly answering a question that I have. So it's so important when you're selling a game engine and the middleware to be able to look at how to present it in that way. Now, if people that are familiar with Audio Kinetics Wise, that's how that works with that game engine with all of the videos that they make. Those are structured and scripted and planned and screen captured and all of this other stuff. I mean, Dan does the screen capture as well, but yeah. Unreal started as an engine that didn't even have 16-bit sound, and now it is used by people that are filming The Mandalorian. So here's what I'm going to leave with before I start opening things up to questions. The whole thing that I've just been talking about has to do with a lesson that I learned from somebody that just got out of a film school in New York. I don't remember the name of the film school. But he came to work with me on Hour of Victory when I was at Midway, and it was a World War II game. And so he had never used Unreal before, but I showed him the tools. Previously, he only had Pro Tools experience. It's a digital audio workstation. And he had only worked on films, but he wasn't egotistical about anything. It was like, tell me what to do. He got to know the tools really well. And guess what happened? 2 weeks in, he said, I don't think this is for me. Is it something, did I not show you the, no, everything you showed me checks out. This is how the tools work. Alex, I'm sorry, but I'm kind of a doer. Everything I've encountered in this engine means I have to ask questions of programmers or figure stuff out, or something broke here and I have to wait for a new build or something like that. Now, games, yes, do have more requirements in terms of the interactive nature compared to film. That doesn't make his statement any less valid. The tools got to work. If you're being told, yeah, you can make a cinematic with this. You can use an in-game element in the cinematic, and here's how to do it. Here's the manual that gives you some information. It should work. There's so many things that game developers try, whether it's Unreal or Unity, that when you get to things that you want to be able to work, even when you create something yourself in terms of a tool, there are so many considerations for making it robust. And it gets harder and harder all the time. So, the lesson that I learned from Aaron, this guy that was barely 22 or however old he was, is that he was absolutely right in terms of the goals that we should have for our tools. And that goes for Unreal and for all the reasons that I've talked about. And I could go on for 3 hours as far as not just Unreal, but Unity as well, because I used Unity on Wasteland. Wow. And all of these, the developers of these tools have the same goals, to enable people to be creative quickly. So having tools that work, super important, but game development, we are nowhere near the level of things like Pro Tools and an Avid Station for being able to cut and color correct or do all that stuff. It's nowhere near that for games. It's just not. I know that engineers that, hearing me say this would be like, well, we've put so much work in, and I know you have. I'm not dissing that at all. Full acknowledgement for that. It still doesn't work the same kind of way that you can iterate with film stuff. And that's a good goal to have, so just keep that in mind as well. All right. I'm going to open things up for people to come up to the microphone and ask questions about anything that you've heard. Now, tomorrow, remember, there's an AMA, and that literally is going to be a bit more of a fun scene where you can ask silly questions. It's going to be, of course, based on what I read in the audience and certain, stuff up front about, things like swearing or things that people are comfortable with or not, right? We're going to establish a really good baseline before we get into stuff. But for now, who's got questions? We got somebody. Yes, sir. What's your name? Oh, sorry. You need to push the... Oh, Ben's got it. There is no button. Yes.
Testing. All right. My name is David.
Sorry, say that again.
David.
David.
First off, I'm very impressed how you could just like break out into certain voices and accents in the middle of
Thank you.
speech. You know,
Blessing and a curse. Thank you very much.
it takes a lot of discipline to just do that on the fly. In regards to like game audio specifically, sound design in games, there's specific tools for it. The middlewares like Wwise and Fmod and all the in-engine stuff with like Unity and Unreal. And that's obviously something that a lot of sound designers have to take into account when they're making the sounds. I can imagine for like smaller independent operations, the sound designer might have to handle both the creation of the sounds and the implementation. What I'm curious about is in larger, more, AA and up like studio environments, would you say that it's more common for that kind of role between the creation of the sound and the implementation to be divvied up into different roles from different people, or does that kind of remain the same, that the sound designer is responsible for actually putting the sounds they create into the game?
Damn, that's a good question. That's a really good question. Okay, so I said that I had a team on Wasteland. When I started at Stormgate, I have some help right now. Stefan Schutz and Tracy Bush are doing some sound design. There's some composers on board. Frank Lepacki has been announced, and Tracy Bush has been announced. Great people that help quite a bit with the creation of the game. When I first started, I was the only guy. And it did take convincing to get more people on board. Take careful stock if you're on a project and what the nature of the work is. Like if you can go through one iteration of creating a sound and implementing the sound, and if you're able to do both, and the nature of the project is one that that thing can happen fairly quickly to the point where you don't feel like you're going to be overwhelmed based on what then is the scope of the project, the two roles can be combined. If at any point it looks like the combination, the scope, like the number of maps, enemies, all the stuff that's going to be in, looks like it's going to be too much based on the timeline. And this is something that you usually work on with a producer. There may not be a producer, depends. If it's an indie project and there's 3 people, way different than a 50-person job, and that's different than a 500-person job. So yes, at Insomniac and Naughty Dog and Ubisoft and Riot and stuff like that, there's teams of people that just do sound design and teams of people that just do implementation. Those are separate things, okay? You think of it like in a film, you do have a sound designer or a sound engineer or whatever it is that they call that, and then you have like mixers and supervisors. And that is the difference like there. There are people that only do mixing and only do post-production, taking the sounds that are there and making them, putting effects in, making sure that the surround stuff is taken care of. So yes, assess that yourself based on the project that you're on and the scope, like I said, and be absolutely realistic with whoever you're working with on what your limits are. And don't hold back, because it is so easy for eager people, myself included, to say, nope, I can do it all. If it's not likely, it ain't going to happen. And say, like, listen, I'm doing, like, whoever it is that's asking, if they're like, please do it all, you'd be like, I'd be doing you a disservice by making shit up that is not possible. So, yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you for the insight. I actually have one more mini, super small question.
Go for it.
Can I give you my business card?
Can you what?
Can I give you my business card?
Yeah, go for it.
All right.
Pop it on here. Are you a sound designer? Yes. Okay, nice to meet you. Nice to meet you too. Thank you. You too. All right, who's next?
Hi, testing, sorry. My name's Tony. This is kind of a two-pronged question in regards to, I would say, your older work on trackers in particular.
Contractors, got it.
So I guess as a longtime fan of your music, including like stuff you made under your old handle, I believe Siren, right?
Yes, Siren, Sandman, Chromatic. I changed my name a lot back then, yeah.
Was 2P Squirrel one of them, actually?
I'm sorry?
Was 2P Squirrel one of your old handles, actually?
I don't think so.
Oh, okay. That wasn't one of the questions. I'm sorry.
No, no worries.
So yeah, the reason it's two-pronged is from a technical aspect and also a creative aspect. Would you say the lessons you've learned, not only implementing tracker music but also composing for it, like would you say the lessons you learned still apply today in the music you write, or maybe the sounds you design?
Good question. Does tracker music skills still apply today? That's a really good question as well. Well, okay, so like just from my perspective, if somebody asked me to do tracked music, like the last time that happened was on Bejeweled 3, which wasn't that long ago, but that was Peter Hodgeba, aka Skaven, so a really talented member of Future Crew back in the day. Oh, yeah. And so these days, like there may well be people or developers that decide they want to use tracker music for whatever reason. I can't say, based on my own perspective and my own view, that would be super relevant.
Right. Yeah.
But here's the thing, though. Furnace Tracker, right? I got introduced to that recently by some people on my... Oh, yes, I do have a Discord channel for everybody that is no longer here. There's a Discord channel called Funky Rustic Social House. And then people... I am educated by the people that are on there about like new tracker stuff like Furnace Tracker. So I've been meaning to check out Furnace Tracker because it does all these awesome chip emulations like PC88 and everything. And that excites me. But have I used it yet? No. I still use a DAW. I still use instruments in that way. It gets me the results really quickly and effectively. So I can't say there's a lot of call for it, just in terms of my perspective. There may be whole groups of, whether it's indie games or otherwise, that still use trackers. I'm sure there's probably still tracker games that get released. I'm not specifically aware of that many.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, sure. No problem. Yeah, if you're into tracking and you're passionate about it, keep doing it, for sure. Yeah. Brendan Hale.
Hey, Alex.
Hey.
Actually, it's funny you brought up Bejeweled 3 because I wanted to ask you about it.
Yeah, sure.
It's one of my favorite tracker soundtracks. And I really
most of that's Peter, just so you know.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I wanted you to talk about maybe your experiences with that game, and because it's hard to find information on it, I feel like, because it's kind of a niche game maybe, even though it's really popular.
Bejeweled 3?
It's pretty popular, but it's hard for me to find information like.
So dev information. Like I can tell you the quick story of how I came on board and then what it was like to work with Peter. Would that help? Okay. Cool. So yeah, Peter and I already knew each other. Like at a GDC a while back, he came up to me and introduced himself. Very humble guy that I had never seen before. So I was just like, and when he told me his name, I just about fell over because I'm such a fan of his work, right? Like he's written some amazing songs, and now he's a 3D modeler guy, or maybe a programmer, I don't know. Real smart. He said, hey, I could use some help on Bejeweled just out of the blue because there were songs that he didn't have time to do. And I was like, yeah, I'd be happy to do that. He gave me a sample set that was the samples that were used for every track in the game. And I was to do stuff for like Treasure Chest and Diamond Mine and Zen, one of the Zen levels, and then one of the classic levels as well. And that was like maybe, I don't know, 15% of the soundtrack as a whole. He did everything else. But it was a lot of fun. Our styles blended pretty well, but he was just like, yep, I could tell this was your track. There's people that do that for my tracker music that I don't hear my sound, but they do. They're like, I knew this was an Alex Brandon track. I'm like, oh, okay, like that's cool. Other than that, there was Jason Pakla, and Jason Pakla was one of the leads at PopCap at the time. All of the original people at PopCap have since left. It is not the same company that it used to be, not the same people that used to work there. My friend Jason used to work there for quite a while. He worked on Plants vs. Zombies 2 in perpetua. It seemed as though it was like, it would just keep going working on the same game, and that does get tiring after a while. I think that's about all I got. Oh, no, we did a soundtrack, and I wrote like just a dance track that was like a bonus track that was in a DAW, not on a tracker, but it used the samples. I think it's about all the info I have on that, but yeah.
Thank you.
If you want more, I can probably dig it up.
Hi, I wanted to ask about going into depth with the imposter syndrome stuff, and also maybe I guess just like trying to pursue sound design as a solo dev. I say that like in quotation marks, big quotation marks, because currently my role is more so as a programmer.
Okay.
Because for the imposter syndrome stuff, at least for programming, it's kind of debilitating because it's just like you have projects that escape the scope of what a solo dev can feasibly do in a reasonable amount of time. And then and then the ambition is too great that you don't want to start on smaller projects because of that.
So wait, let me make sure I understand the question. So you started with imposter syndrome, and you're saying your role is a programmer, right?
Right.
And that there are projects that grow out of scope. Is that? And I'm sorry. Is that what you said?
Kind of, yes.
Okay. And you said something about not wanting to work on smaller projects because it keeps happening, where you'll be asked to do things that are unrealistic.
Yeah, like for example, it's like, oh, I want to make the next Titanfall 2 or something like that. But if you don't have enough experience, you probably should work on something like Pong or an RPG or something like that.
Oh, okay, I get it.
And then maybe just like your personal methods of tackling this sort of issue.
Oh, okay. I think I understand. So, there are things, there are projects that, if I'm interpreting you rightly, there are projects that I look at, and people in the industry, like Rob Bridgett, for example. Rob Bridgett is very senior at Sony. He's been in pretty high-ranking positions. We've known each other for a long time. He's written several books that are very, very, very deep and clever on game audio. And sometimes I'll see work by people that I've hired, like Scott Lawler at Obsidian, where he'll go on to Blizzard and he'll present the Overwatch audio system. And I'll look at those things and I will feel inadequate. I'll feel like I don't know if I could aspire to a project like that because I don't think my skills are high enough for that level. Is that kind of what you were talking about, where like you might feel sort of trapped with the skill set that you have? And
sort of. It's more so just been a foot in the door issue for me. I guess recent years I haven't really pursued programming specifically. It's been 3D modeling.
Nice. That's cool. Yeah. No, I mean, we have our fears that are very real, very, very real. As far as like, just like how can I hang with like a team that seems as though everybody's got. Most of the time, it's what our brain tells us about the perception of the environment that we might want to be involved in that says that you're not good enough. Right, like that's like a key component of imposter syndrome. It comes from a negative space in the brain. Just in my experience and experiences that I've had, even with my own family, that is just a thing that lights to spout negativity. And some people say that's like a defense mechanism. It's like an instinct that's trying to protect you or something like that. Let your passion this is what I do. Let your passion like essentially guide you forward, because passion really helps. Like when you're really into something, it's almost like you can't stop doing it because your passion is fueling you, right? So I take it 3D modeling and printing
3D
is something that you have
CAD
passion
modeling.
for because you got that cool sword there. So whether it's programming, like get into a space, limit that space, like don't step too far out of it and be like, because like if I start getting into, no, I'm going to get into the Overwatch design stuff and I'm going to do this, I get too overwhelmed, right? Yeah. And so I sort of step back, I get more realistic about what it is that keeps me interested without looking at this stuff that seems as though it's beckoning and yet creating that negativity. And that helps a lot in terms of just staying put, because again, the passion is like, I like doing this, whether other people think it's good or whether they like it, doesn't matter, because you are feeding your own creativity that way.
Thank you.
Yeah. Good luck. We got time for one more, Ben? It's supposed to end at 10, right? Okay, we'll do. Yeah.
Cool.
Let's do this last question.
Cool, I'll make it quick. So my name is Osiris Green. I'm an audio engineer. I've been mixing, recording, I've done sound effects for audiobooks. I've produced for artists. I've done music for, I want to say, amateur films and stuff. I produce for my group. I mix and master our stuff. I'm highly interested in composing for games. I don't have any knowledge or experience. I don't know. A lot of this stuff being here is new. A lot of these things I'm hearing for the first time. So I wanted to ask, based on my experience and what I've done, what is the best way to build relationships with like companies that you've worked with, so they can be even interested in possibly like reaching out for some music or something like that?
Did you say your name was Osiris?
Yes, sir.
That is an awesome name.
Thank you.
Cool.
That's just the music name. My government name is Brian. But
Gotcha.
It's still kind of cool because it has a Y in it. So yeah.
No, I like it. Cool. All right. So yes, very good question. I didn't cover this. I'm being told to wrap up. You hit an important point. Okay. Back in my day, when I sent the demos to Epic and Apogee and all those, it was a matter of just emailing a few people, and as long as you had something decent to show, people would respond. These days, the things that I do myself I work for Frost Giant. At the same time, I've been fortunate enough that they allow me to continue work with Funky Rustic, which is a independent contracting company. Now, I can't work on real-time strategy games. That makes sense. But other stuff, like I've done commercial voiceover for local alcohol or spirit chains called Specs, and so those things can continue. But if I need contract gigs, I create a CRM. This is soul-sucking, by the way, so get ready, okay? So I create a CRM document in Google Sheets or whatever, some sort of spreadsheet, and there's tools that do this, but usually they cost a bunch of money. I put in the companies that I'm interested in, right? The things that I find passionate about. Like if you play games that you enjoy, start with those, right? Look around for developers, find their websites, see if there's an HR email, see if there's any way to contact them, and if you have interest in working with them, make sure you mention what they're doing and what your interest is. Don't start something with, this is what I do and this is my demo, right? It usually doesn't specifically relate to the people that you're going to be talking to, and it doesn't necessarily show your interest in helping them in a specific way. So there was a guy that, Stoic, Arnie, I don't remember his last name, but he is one of the co-people that runs Stoic, that did Banner Saga, and they're working on a new game with Microsoft right now. Great guy, Arnie Jorgensen, that's right. So he said, he just openly told me, I was not pitching to this guy. Our kids went to the same swim place. So while they were getting their swim lesson, he was telling me, the people that did the sound design on Banner Saga, the reason they got that job was because I was getting all of these demos from people saying, here's me and my demo, I want to work with you, and that's it. The people that got the job saw the Kickstarter for Banner Saga, and they did new sounds to the video that we released that already had its own sounds, but they said, this is our take on how we would do the sounds. And here's a paragraph as to why we would do it that way. And it showed passion and interest and everything. So make that CRM, approach companies with that method. It's a lot of work. It's soul-sucking, like I said. It's draining, but it's the most important part of what you do because that's what's going to get you the projects. So
awesome. Thank you for your feedback and time. Appreciate you.
You're welcome. Okay, everyone. Thank you for coming. Have a great rest of your MAGFest. I'm going to turn this off, hopefully with the same method that I did the other stuff.